Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first of the All About That Place Pacific Edition programs, where I am thrilled to welcome our two speakers today. We have Diane Grant speaking to us from after midnight in London, where she'll be talking about Bayleys Plantation, home of a national hero, followed by Annette Burke-Little talking about using digitized maps from the Library of Congress to understand your place. This is part of our series we call the Pacific Edition because we wanted to have a way to engage a community on the other side of the planet from London into the joy of studying a place, a single place, as if it's a character in our family stories. I was enchanted with this idea and absolutely delighted that my friends at the Society of Genealogists let me do this and do this as part of our Projectkin community. So with that, I'm going to turn just a minimal introduction to Diane. Diane is a certified genealogist and a member of the Registry of Qualified Genealogists. Is that right?
That's correct.
um, and has a keen interest in researching all aspects of Caribbean history and hopes to encourage others to do the same. So that means you as well as me. And she has a wonderful presentation ready for us today. Let me prepare the presentation first and then share my screen.
Okay, hi, I'm Diane, otherwise known as Diggy of Diggy's Diaspora, and my presentation tonight is Bayleys Plantation, home of a national hero. So, for 42 years ago, my family moved from England to Barbados, and our house there is called Bayleys Great House in St. Philip. But to this day, everybody still calls it Bayleys Plantation. You may wonder if that's even significant. I guess it would help if I define what differentiates the two terms. A plantation is an agricultural estate on which crops such as coffee, sugarcane, and tobacco are grown, and a great house is a large house or mansion at the center of plantation life. Once it stops being a working plantation, its classification changes. Oops, next slide. The significance of this may lie in the many times I would state that my family lives at Bayleys Great House, and I'm corrected by the person inquiring to see if I actually mean Bayleys Plantation. This determines something that has been applied culturally to the demarcation of the place as a whole, not just the house. Oops, I think we're on the wrong slide. Can you go to the next? So now, can you go to the next slide? Sorry, Barbara. Yeah.
That's right.
So now, before I proceed, I wish to alert you all to the fact that I'll be discussing slavery in the Caribbean, and certain terms and ideologies from that time may be conveyed. So next slide. In the middle of the courtyard at Bayleys stands an ornate tree. It is a bearded fig tree, and its trunk is not just one solid unit, but it's made up of multiple twisted trunks. We decided to make a swing in the tree where the whole family would gather in the evening and lime, which is what Barbadians call hanging out. One day on return from school, the swing was gone, and all we were told at first was that the material was needed elsewhere. Later would we find out the history of our house and the role played by our magnificent tree. Next slide. To be told that the tree was the site of much pain and torture and was known locally as the hanging tree was hard for 8-year-old me to understand, not just what had taken place in my now beloved home, but also widely throughout the island. Adult me, however, feels we should all be open to hearing the stories. Next slide. Barbados is the most easterly of the Caribbean islands, with the Caribbean Sea to the west of it and the Atlantic Ocean to the right. In 1627, the William and John ship carried 50 settlers from England to Barbados, which included an 18-year-old James Drax. Next slide. If the name sounds familiar, this may be because 400 years later, this family still has a working plantation on the island called Drax Hall, owned by British politician Richard Drax. Next slide. During the journey of the William and John, it overpowered a Portuguese vessel, and 10 Black enslaved Africans were taken on board. This would be the English sugar empire's first slaves. Out of the 50 settlers, why have I highlighted James Drax? Drax would be known as the father of the British West Indian sugar empire. Next slide. By 1641, he had over 400 acres on the island and sugar production was booming. With the increase in sugar production, the planters needed cheap labor, and they found this in enslaved Africans, who they deemed easier to control than the Irish and English poor. Next slide. In various deeds at the Barbados Archives, Roger Webb is noted as acquiring various parcels of land in St. Philip. Next slide. In 1719, he first acquired 80 acres of land, which cost £1,000. The following year, he acquires further 90 acres. Joseph Bayley is also stated as purchasing 12 acres of land in 1738 from one of Webb's neighbours for £350. Next slide. The ownership of Webb's land in St. Philip, which is located at the most easterly point of the island, would be transferred to Joseph Bayley in 1765 and the Great House built. Between 1738 and 1834, the ownership of the plantation would go from Bayley to Alexander Scott. Next slide. When Joseph Bayley died, the property was inherited by his son, John Bayley, but he died 1 year after his father. John's daughter, Mary, married Thomas Wiltshire, and they had 4 children. Their properties were inherited by their son, John Bayley Wiltshire. Next slide. Thomas Wiltshire was the owner of Wiltshire Plantation. On his death, Mary kept control of Bayleys, and their son kept control of Wiltshire's. Mary's daughter, Margaret, married and had 2 daughters, Margaret and Anna Maria. Joseph's daughter, Mary, married Thomas Franklin and had a son named Joseph Bayley Franklin. This man had several colored children with enslaved women, but the one to note for future reference is their child born to Leah, called Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin. Next slide. On John Bayley Wiltshire's death, he bequeathed the properties to his niece, Anna Maria Elcock, and not his sister. Anna Maria owned the properties alone for 1 year before she married Reverend Alexander Scott. Next slide. Inventories were utilized in the Caribbean when stock taking was needed, for example, during a sale or when mortgaging a property. As early as 1720, enslaved people working the land, which would become Bayleys, had been documented. Next slide. In 1806, John Bayley Wiltshire also created a list of the enslaved on Bayleys as he endeavored to break his mother's will so he could own the property outright. Next slide. By 1812, Wiltshire's land amounted to approximately 657 acres with 350 slaves, second only to the units of 753 acres for Thickets and Fortescue, which were owned by Lord Harewood. Next slide. Wiltshire ignored his mother's wishes, which are noted on the slide. Though weirdly worded, they could be interpreted as giving certain slaves their freedom. The dismissal of Mary Wiltshire's will could have been the start of dissent by the slaves if they had known their former mistress's intent. Wills are one of the ways in which those doing Caribbean research can keep track of the movement of enslaved persons as they are willed to family members or friends of the deceased. Next slide. In John Bayley Wiltshire's will, we find out that an enslaved mulatto man by the name of George Seeley, who unfortunately was not manumitted as stated in Wiltshire's mother's will, was now to be given to a white planter by the name of Thomas Seeley. Yes, you'll be right if you wonder if these 2 people are related. Thomas Seeley was both a relative of John Bayley Wiltshire and George Seeley. Next slide. Wiltshire also bequeathed his favourite Negro slave, Thomas, his house in Roebuck Street in Bridgetown, with the right to move or sell the house, £700, along with £42 per annum for life. Thomas was also to be manumitted, which would be paid for by Wiltshire's estate. This was a substantial bequest, and as such, Thomas should show up in further documents and would be an interesting person to research. The National Archives in the UK have copies of colonial documents for all of their overseas territories, some which are available online, but others have not been digitized. They house the slavery compensation documents along with the triennial slave registers. Next slide. Anna Maria Scott's sister, Margaret, tried to claim inheritance through the compensation scheme. She may have died before the case was completed, as her sister did in 1848. The slave registers are better for family history research than compensation documents, as they give names, ages, and roles held on the plantation, along with where the person was born. Next slide. It's time that I introduce you to Bussard, the leader of the 1816 rebellion of Barbados. Many historians have written about Bussard, and he has caused much debate as historians tackle the topic of who was the leader of the rebellion or who conceptualized it. In all such things, I would like to go with the Caribbean metaphor of one hand don't clap. The Right Excellent General Bussa has been chosen to have been the ultimate leader of the uprising and given one of the highest accolades of being one of the national heroes of Barbados. Next slide. As another Caribbean saying goes, we need to pick sense out of nonsense. No one enslaved person could have organized and disseminated the information for a national uprising to occur to all enslaved persons on the island. There was a team, and the known players were as shown on the following slides. Next slide. The rebellion was planned to start on Easter Monday, but due to a false start, they went into action on the 14th of April, 1816, Easter Sunday at 8:30. Next slide. Final planning occurred on Good Friday at a dance held at River Plantation, which sits directly down the hill to the right of Bayleys. Sorry you can't see it properly from my old video, but it literally is behind those trees. Next slide. The night, oops,
One more.
no, yeah, you have to go to the next slide. That one's repeating. Oh, yeah, go. Yeah.
Back.
Yep. So the night of the dance, the head organizers decided that Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin would be governor of the island in the revolutionary government. If you remember my Bailey family tree that I showed before, Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin was the child of Joseph Bailey Franklin and an enslaved woman called Leah. Next slide. In the pictures that I have included in the talk, I've been trying to show how the land stretches for miles with uninterrupted view. This is 2024, and the view has not changed substantially from 1816. Next slide. The evening of the 14th, a heap of cane thrash was fired on Bayleys. That explosion of firelight into the night sky was the catalyst that promptly started others setting fire to thrash heaps and cane fields on every estate in the surrounding area. The fire was said to have spread during the whole night from field to field, with white inhabitants horrified spectators unsure of their future. However, targeting the lives of the whites was not a priority to the rebels. Next slide. Why were the slaves rebelling? The end of the previous year, it had been stated that Nanny Grigg and or Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin had informed the slaves that freedom was near with the introduction of the registry bill. When this didn't occur, it was then put forth that their owners had prevented their release, and the only way for them to receive their freedom was to put fire to it, meaning they should fight for it. Next slide. Even though the island and its militia were taken by surprise, the insurrection was crushed by the end of Easter Monday. The War of Bussa was brief, but the destruction was widespread. The battle ended in defeat, with many dying on the field, such as General Bussa. Those who were not killed in the battle were court-martialed, and the guilty were hung on the plantations where they lived. This was the way they brought about the end of Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin and any illusion of power he may have had. Next slide. Other convicts were deported first to British Honduras, where they would not allow them entry. Then they were taken to Sierra Leone, where they arrived in 1818. The 1818 report, written by the Select Committee, was drawn up to reflect on the rebellion as a whole and to enumerate the loss of property to the slave owners. But no such care was taken to register the names of the enslaved that lost their life in battle or afterwards. Next slide. Finding ancestors who were enslaved in the Caribbean can be very difficult. Caribbean families can be a closed book when it comes to discussing anything past general day-to-day matters. This is understandable, especially as this period in history was traumatic on many levels. Hopefully this talk will shed light on not only what documentation is out there, but how they may be used to further your research. Next slide. To conclude, my only wish is to convey to the Barbados freedom fighters that their actions were not in vain. We cannot call all of your names, so we symbolically raise a glass to you all when we say, Bussa, well done. Next slide. Yeah.